Ma'am, you can't be back here. This area is staff only.
I am staff. I work here.
Sure you do. Where's your badge?
It's clipped to my hip.
That could belong to anyone. Turn around.
At 6:48 a.m. on March 4th, a Tuesday, a hospital police officer put handcuffs on the head of his own emergency department in the ambulance bay while a bleeding patient waited 50 feet away. He thought she was stealing supplies. He thought she didn't belong. Within 90 seconds, Officer Cole Brennan triggered a chain of events that would cost St. Auden Regional Medical Center $7 million, end his law enforcement career permanently, and launch a state investigation into a pattern of profiling his supervisors had ignored for 3 years. His career was over. He just didn't know it yet. Before we continue, where are you watching from? If this is your first time here, hit subscribe. Stories like these need to be shared, and your support helps us bring more truth to light. A quick note before we go further. This account is based on documented patterns drawn from civil rights cases across the country and represents a composite of real, recurring experience. The details are constructed to reflect how these incidents actually unfold. Dr. Naomi Ward had practiced emergency medicine for 16 years. She'd trained at one of the busiest level I trauma centers in the Midwest, published on sepsis protocol, and spent 4 years rebuilding St. Auden's emergency department after it nearly lost its trauma designation. 3 years before that March morning, she'd been named Chief of Emergency Medicine, first Black woman to hold the position in the hospital's 100-year history. Her colleagues described her as calm. Her residents described her as exacting. Her patients described her as the reason they were still alive. That morning, she wasn't the chief. She was a physician, arriving early for a shift she knew would be brutal because dispatch had already flagged a multi-vehicle collision inbound. She wore navy scrubs, white running shoes, and her hospital identification badge clipped to her waistband. She'd parked in her assigned spot. She'd badged through 2 secure doors. Everything about her presence was authorized, routine, and ordinary. Officer Cole Brennan saw none of that. He saw a Black woman moving quickly through a restricted corridor, and his mind didn't register physician. It registered intruder. St. Auden Regional Medical Center sat at the edge of Callaway County, a 540-bed teaching hospital built in 1968 and expanded in 2011, serving a metro area of roughly 400,000 people. Like many academic medical centers, it operated its own sworn police force officers with arrest powers, duty weapons, and jurisdiction over the campus. The ambulance bay and the corridor connecting it to the trauma room were the most secure part of the building, monitored by cameras and restricted to clinical staff. Officer Cole Brennan, 26 years old, had been with the hospital police department for 3 years. His personnel file told a more complicated story. 5 complaints in 3 years, everyone involving a stop of a Black staff member or visitor who, in Brennan's words from his own incident reports, didn't look like they belonged. A Black respiratory therapist stopped twice in 1 month. A patient's father questioned in the pediatric wing. A Black medical student detained near the pharmacy. None of the complaints led to discipline. Each was closed with a retraining recommendation Brennan completed and never absorbed, so he stayed on duty, and the pattern continued. At 6:47 a.m., Brennan spotted Dr. Ward in the trauma corridor and intercepted her near the ambulance bay door. His body camera, recording the entire encounter, captured a posture rigid with the authority rookies perform when they haven't earned it. According to the Bodycam footage, Brennan ordered her to stop and demanded identification. Dr. Ward gestured to the badge on her hip and explained she was due in the trauma bay. Brennan didn't look at the badge. Brennan, his voice flat. "We've had supplies going missing. You fit what I'm looking for." "Doctor," Ward turned, more puzzled than angry. "I am the chief of emergency medicine. Read the badge." The body cam recorded what he said next. "Anyone can buy scrubs. Hands where I can see them." Outside, the dispatch radio crackled. The collision was 90 seconds out, 3 critical, and the on-call trauma attending was being paged. That attending was standing in front of him in handcuffs. But Brennan didn't cancel anything. He reached for his cuff. Should an employee ID badge be enough to establish you belong in your own workplace? Yes or no? Drop your answer below. This is where bias becomes dangerous. Brennan had already decided what he was looking at: a theft suspect, a person out of place. The possibility that the woman in front of him outranked every clinician in the building never entered his calculation because his assumption had closed the door on it before she spoke a word. Dr. Ward kept her voice level, the way she did with frightened patients. According to witness statements later collected by Internal Affairs, she warned him directly, "Officer, I have a trauma patient inbound. Detaining me puts a life at risk." Brennan responded by ordering her against the wall. Charge nurse Diane Foster came through the bay doors at that moment and froze. Foster had worked under Dr. Ward for 3 years. Her statement to investigators was brief and damning. She told Brennan he was handcuffing the chief of the department. He told her to step back. The ambulance arrived. The first patient, a 19-year-old with internal bleeding, was wheeled past a handcuffed physician who could have been treating it. A second-year resident took the lead instead, unsupervised, on a case above his training. The patient survived. The margin, trauma surgeons later testified, was thinner than it should have been. Lieutenant Marcus Reyes, the hospital police shift supervisor, arrived 4 minutes later. A 14-year veteran, he read the scene in seconds: the chief in cuffs, the panicked nurse, the trauma activation in progress. He ordered the cuffs off immediately and pulled Brennan's badge and weapon on the spot, placing him on administrative leave effective that moment. By 7:10 a.m., Dr. Ward was scrubbed in and working the second patient. She didn't break composure once. She finished her shift. Then she called her attorney. What the body cam recorded that morning would be played in a federal courtroom 15 months later. The hospital's first instinct was containment. A brief statement acknowledged an incident and confirmed an officer was on leave. But the trauma corridor had cameras, the bay had witnesses, and Diane Foster had recorded the final 30 seconds on her phone. Within 24 hours, the footage had leaked, and what it showed turned a local story into a national one. Hospital police officer handcuffs Black chief of emergency medicine in her own ER. Doctor cuffed while trauma patient waits. The video of Brennan telling a department chief that anyone can buy scrubs was viewed more than 11 million times in 72 hours. Physician organizations issued statements. The State Medical Association condemned the conduct. 3 former St. Auden employees came forward to describe similar stops by the same office. The hospital's internal affairs unit launched a formal review. The state's police standards board opened a parallel inquiry. The internal affairs report, completed in 5 weeks, was unsparing. It found that Brennan left his assigned post, initiated contact without reasonable suspicion, ignored a visible identification badge, and detained a clinician during an active trauma activation. The report flagged the 5 prior complaints and concluded supervisors had failed to act on a documented pattern. 9 weeks after the incident, Officer Cole Brennan was terminated. The termination letter cited unlawful detention, conduct unbecoming an officer, and a demonstrated pattern of racially disparate enforcement. His union declined to contest it once the body cam footage and the prior complaints became public. The State Police Standards Board then voted to revoke his certification. Brennan's name was entered into the National Decertification Index. He would not work as a sworn officer again. Here's the question I keep coming back to. If a department chief with a badge, a parking spot, and 16 years of credentials can be handcuffed in her own building, what happens to the nurse, the orderly, the visitor who has none of that standing? What would you do if it happened to you? Drop your thoughts in the comment. 11 weeks after the incident, Dr. Ward filed a federal civil rights lawsuit in U.S. District Court. The complaint named Officer Cole Brennan individually, his supervising lieutenant, and the medical center. The court filings laid out 7 counts. Meticulously document. Count 1, Fourth Amendment violation, unlawful seizure for the detention and handcuffing without probable cause. Count 2, 14th Amendment violation, denial of equal protection through race-based enforcement. Count 3, violation of civil rights under color of law under 42 U.S.C. Section 1983. Count 4, defamation for the public accusation of theft, which implied criminal conduct against a licensed physician. Count 5, intentional infliction of emotional distress. Count 6, false arrest under state law. Count 7, municipal liability failure to train and supervise, and a failure to act on 5 prior complaints documenting the same behavior. The lawsuit sought $20 million in damages and a court-ordered overhaul of the hospital police department. Discovery made the institution's position untenable. The settlement agreement and case filings confirmed what the Bodycam already suggested. Brennan's complaint history had been buried in closed files, his retraining never tracked, his supervisor's warnings overruled by chronic understaffing. The hospital's lawyers reached the same conclusion the cities did in cases like this one. It was indefensible. The $7 million settlement was announced at a press conference 15 months after the incident. Dr. Ward stood at the podium, carrying the same composure she brought into every trauma bay. The settlement represented accountability, she told reporters, but it didn't undo being handcuffed in the place she'd spent 3 years rebuilding. She announced she would direct $2 million of it to fund a scholarship and pipeline program for physicians of color entering emergency medicine. The reforms attached to the settlement were structural: mandatory bias and de-escalation training before any hospital police assignment, body-worn camera review for every detention on hospital ground, a standing requirement that officers verify clinical credentials before any enforcement action involving staff, an independent monitor to audit complaints, the kind of oversight that, had it existed earlier, would have flagged Brennan after his second complaint, not his sixth. In the 2 years following implementation, the monitor's reports documented a 71% drop in staff-initiated complaints against hospital police. Dr. Ward still runs the emergency department. She still badges through the same doors at the same hour. But in an interview a year later, she offered a reflection that stayed with the reporter. The badge, the title, the 16 years, none of it stopped a stranger from deciding in 2 seconds that she didn't belong. That, she noted, is the part a settlement can't fix. Officer Cole Brennan's law enforcement career lasted 3 years and ended in 9 weeks. The footage remains online, more than 18 million views, now used in hospital security training and police academy curricula as a case study in how bias overrides obvious fact. Brennan saw a thief. Everyone else saw the chief of the department. The difference between those two perceptions cost a hospital $7 million, ended a career, and taught a room full of clinicians that credentials don't always protect you from someone else's assumption. This wasn't one bad officer. It was 5 complaints ignored, a supervisor overruled, and a system that cleared a man for duty it had every reason to question. Fix the officer, and you fix nothing. Fix the system, and maybe the next person who doesn't have a chief's title still gets to walk through their own building without being put in cuffs. If you believe stories like this matter, if you think credentials should be enough, and that departments must act on warning signs before they become disasters, hit subscribe. We're exposing how unchecked bias and ignored complaints turn into million-dollar failures, and we're going to keep telling these stories until the system listens. This isn't about one doctor or one officer. It's about every person who's been told they don't belong in a space they earn.